Good evening and welcome to Ahead of Her Time and Behind the Scenes, the inspirational life of Pauly Murray. My name is Frances Castillo and I am the chair of the Orange County Human Relations Commission. On behalf of the Commission, I would like to thank you for joining us this evening as we explore the life, ideas, and accomplishments of the Reverend Dr. Pauly Murray. The Human Relations Commission is a citizens advisory board to the Orange County Board of County Commissioners. Our mission is to foster mutual understanding among residents and eliminate prejudice, intolerance, and discrimination in order to make Orange County a better place for all people to live, work, and do business. This is a mission that, as you will see tonight, is one Pauly Murray also worked toward as a trailblazer confronting sexism, racism, and discrimination. In 1990, the Board of County Commissioners established the Pauly Murray Awards to recognize an Orange County youth, adult, and business who exemplify the traits of Pauly Murray. Someone who has served the community with distinction in pursuit of equality, human rights, and justice. The award is presented annually by the Human Relations Commission, and we invite you, after everything you experience and learn about the Reverend Dr. Murray tonight, to consider those you know who embody Dr. Murray's legacy and submit their name for consideration when the awards nomination process opens later this fall. To all the K-12 teachers and youth workers joining us, please consider your students for nomination for the Youth Award. Information about the 2022 Pauly Murray Awards will soon be available on the Orange County, North Carolina Human Relations Commission Facebook page. I'm looking forward to this evening, and it is my pleasure to now turn it over to our hosting partner, Carolina K-12 at UNC Chapel Hill. Christy Norris, the director of Carolina K-12, will provide some overview information and introduce our talented panelists for the evening. Thank you all so much and enjoy the program.
Thank you. Thank you to the Orange County Human Rights Coalition, and welcome everyone to Ahead of Her Time and Behind the Scenes, the inspirational life of Pauly Murray. My name is Christy Norris. I'm the director for Carolina K-12 at UNC Chapel Hill, and I have been looking forward to tonight for months because I am officially a card-carrying member of the Pauly Murray fan club. And so it's just wonderful to be here with all of you. You know, it is impossible to cover all of the phenomenon of Pauly Murray's life in just an hour and a half. So our goal tonight is really that you will leave wanting to learn more, that you will leave curious, and that you will go ready to tell someone, to teach someone about all of the wonder that is Pauly Murray. I want to just take a few minutes before we dive into the program tonight, really just to set the stage of this inspirational life that was Pauly Murray, Anna Pauline Murray, better known as Pauly. And I think the most accurate way to really classify all that she was and all that she did and all that she believed is really to say that she was full of firsts and befores. So 15 years before Rosa Parks, Pauli Murray was arrested in 1940 Virginia for refusing to move to the back of a segregated bus when traveling from New York to her home in Durham. Before the brave students of A&T and Bennett College and others took their stand by sitting down at the Woolworth's lunch counter in 1960 Greensboro, Pauly Murray in 1943 had settled down on a stool in Washington, D.C.'s Little Palace cafeteria, where she and her Howard University classmates refused to budge until that cafeteria desegregated. Pauly Murray was the first person of color to receive a JSD at Yale Law, was the first Black female Episcopal priest. Her storied life includes friendships with Langston Hughes and Eleanor Roosevelt. Pauly Murray wrote constantly, a memoir, legal writings, poetry. She was a labor organizer. She was a legal theorist whose ideas were utilized by Thurgood Marshall to win Brown versus Board of Education. She was even referenced later in the 1970s by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Pauly Murray was a co-founder for the National Organization for Women. And she spent her life working to actualize her single-minded intention of destroying Jim Crow and what she coined as Jane Crow. And rightfully so. Spending much of her early life here in Durham, North Carolina, she was no stranger to the realities of Jim Crow and segregation. And I want to pause here for just a moment and let you hear some of Pauli's own words, describing the world in which she grew up, which was obviously very influential in regards to who she became. And although Pauly Murray passed away in 1985, she left behind one of the most compelling oral history interviews I think I've ever heard. And I want to play just a quick 4-minute excerpt from this 1976 interview that she did with UNC Chapel Hill's Southern Oral History program. And in this, we glimpse not only the realities that Pauly faced while coming of age, but also how those realities really fueled her relentless push and drive for justice and change.
Lynching was something always in the background. You know, the terror of lynching was always in the background. The awareness of the Ku Klux Klan was always in the background. I suppose this awareness to a child of my generation grows with you just like almost a part of your body and your being. It's hard to say when you become aware because you take it in all of the time. I don't remember, for example, lynchings being prominently portrayed in the newspapers, but we would hear about them by word of mouth. You know, somebody got lynched over in so-and-so county last night. I think sometimes they were even suppressed in the newspapers, but one was aware of it. It was something that one was aware of. Awareness of segregation, of course, wherever you went in town, you saw the white signs, colored signs, drinking fountains. Anytime that one would go down into the public center of town, one would be very, very conscious of it. Obviously, one would be conscious of separate schools and separate churches. And the older people talking. It's something that you simply grow up with. My grandmother would tell me about the Ku Klux Klan riding around her little cabin up in Chapel Hill, and how sometimes she'd get up, you know, at midnight and walk the 12 miles to Durham because she was afraid to stay there. This was during Reconstruction time, when apparently the Ku Klux Klan was not very happy to have a person of color owning property up there. And you sense those things, you feel them. I think I operated on 2 levels. I was an all-around athlete. I was editor-in-chief of the high school newspaper. I was a member of the debating club. I was, you know, involved in most of the things that kids are involved in. Enjoyed doing these things, but underneath, I hated segregation so that all I wanted to do was to get away from segregation. When I graduated from high school with honors, the Wilberforce Club got together and bestowed a scholarship upon me to go to Wilberforce. And I turned it down.
I see. Now, you're turning it down.
No more segregation for me. I mean, I was what, 15? But that I knew.
So you'll hear more about Pauli's early life and, in fact, her entire life throughout tonight's program, including more excerpts from Pauly herself, which, I mean, honestly, I think it doesn't get more powerful than that. But, you know, despite her lifelong pursuit and battle against Jim and Jane Crow, it's only recently that her life and legacy have really started to come out from the shadows. In fact, a lot of you in your pre-registration questions even asked, why haven't I heard about her before? Why is she not more famous? And, I have to say, we're really lucky in North Carolina to have great folks like the Pauly Murray Center for History and Justice, who have been working relentlessly for years and years to try to elevate her story. There's a great recent podcast by WUNC who did a program named and about Pauly. And of course, we are all thrilled and excited that there is a new documentary, My Name is Pauly Murray, that has just started premiering. Those of you that are local right now, it is playing at the Carolina Theater in Durham. I highly recommend you go there and check it out. And of course, October 1st, it's streaming on Amazon Prime for those who have access to that. Because the fact is, we all need to learn as much as we possibly can about this phenomenal force. And let's just help make sure that Pauly Murray finally gets her due. As Kelsey Abel says in a great recent article for the Washington Post, Murray was so ahead of the curve that when history was eventually written, it was often written without mention of Murray. History couldn't keep up with Pauly Murray. And in so many ways, her words still speak to us today. Listen, for instance, to these profound words.
My feeling is that if this country is to survive, we must live together in harmony. And we must live together, in a sense, in a spirit of harmony. You may call it brotherhood or whatnot, but we cannot survive as a divided country. Therefore, there is a need for people to be involved with and concerned about reconciliation, even as we are working on the liberation.
And on that terribly relevant note of division, I want to speak directly to those of you K-12 teaching heroes that are with us tonight. Please, please teach every student you encounter about Pauly Murray. And we, Carolina K-12, we're here to help you with that tonight. We're going to share some lesson plans by us and by others, as well as a ton of resources for you to use in your classroom and to further your own learning. Keep your eyes on the chat box, and we'll send a follow-up email after this program. But remember, as educators, we have to continually ask ourselves, whose stories are we choosing to elevate? Whose stories are missing or secondary, and why? And remember, if history missed Pauly Murray for so long, who else are we missing? And, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the way that our history classrooms are unfortunately becoming political catnip. I know many of you are experiencing whiplash as our legislators bluster and bark about what history we should teach and how we should teach it. So our response to that is, one, remember that you are a valued professional. We appreciate you more than we can say. And two, teach the truth. Teach the truth. We have to acknowledge the hard, but of course we want to do that in a way that signals hope and highlights the resistance and the resilience. And the story of Pauly Murray is a perfect one to exemplify these themes. And yet again, here she's offered insight for us that is particularly relevant to this moment in history, when she said, "It has taken me a lifetime to discover that true emancipation lies in the acceptance of the whole past, in deriving strength from all my roots, in facing up to the degradation as well as the dignity of my ancestors." So let us be courageous enough in honor of Pauly Murray. Let us be courageous enough to teach the full truth of history, to acknowledge the whole past, the hard and the hopeful, in a true spirit of reconciliation. So with that, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you Professor, Performer, Director, Performing Artist Extraordinaire, Katherine Hunter Williams. All right, yeah, come on on. Kathy, thank you so much
Yes.
hello. Thank you for
Hi.
being here.
Thank
How
you.
are
Thank
you?
I'm great. I am great. Thank you so much. That was so inspiring, Christy.
Well,
Thank
you,
you very much.
I had to say those things before you because, it's only going to get better. So I want to start by telling everybody with us just how amazing you are. So I'm sure some folks are recognizing you from Playmakers Repertory Company. If we were live, you guys could get her autograph, but we're not. So, sorry. But you all know you have delivered so many just knockout performances with your work with Playmakers. You are currently on the faculty of UNC's Department of Dramatic Art. And Kathy is the performance director for Hidden Voices, a nonprofit dedicated to bringing life-changing stories into a public forum. We're going to make sure we give everybody that website
Great.
and our follow-up resources. I happen to know that you, like me, are a card-carrying member of the Pauly Murray fan club. We've both been looking forward to this so much. And as such, you directed a lovely play about Pauly Murray called To By the Sun, The Challenge of Pauly Murray, a play by Lyndon Harris that premiered in 2011 in Durham. Is that right?
Yes, actually, we partnered with the Pauly Murray Center with Barbara Lau. She was one who commissioned it, and we've been doing it for quite a few years in a couple of reincarnations. Most recently, the company went to New York, I want to say in 2018, to perform at the Episcopal Church in New York City, right across from where the World Trade Center stood. They visited Yale College in the naming of the Pauly Murray building there. And then they went to the law school at Howard University. So they have a little mini East Coast tour, which was quite successful and lovely.
That's amazing. That's so amazing. Well, we are so honored to have you and a few players in the background here to do some readings from this wonderful show for us. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys as you take us into a little bit of, I believe, Pauly Murray's early life. And a final note to everyone joining us, please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A, and throughout the program, we're going to get to as many of those as we can. But for now, I turn it over to the incredible Kathy Williams and her team. Thanks, guys.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go off camera and I'll let Kayla Brown, who's reading our stage directions for us, come on and introduce our first excerpt.
To By the Sun is written by Lyndon Harris and is based on the life of Pauly Murray. We meet Pauly on the eve of her ordination at Chapel of the Cross in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. She visits her family home in Durham, North Carolina, looking for inspiration for tomorrow's sermon. Over the course of the play, we travel back in time and meet people from Pauly's past. The play uses projections of her family, friends, lovers, colleagues, and newspaper headlines in order to share the story of her life. We have selected 4 short scenes to share with you. Kathy Williams will read Pauly. Edith Snow will be reading Pauly's grandmother Cornelia, her aunt Pauline, and various other characters. Jade Arnold will be reading Thurgood Marshall, Dr. Leon Ransom, and various other characters. I will be reading stage directions. Excerpt 1. The opening of the play. Pauly is at her Durham childhood home where she feels the presence of her grandmother Cornelia and her aunt Pauline. Act 1. The living room of the Fitzgerald home place, Durham, North Carolina. A few discarded chairs and small rolling tables stand jumbled to one side. A short stool sits atop a wooden bench. Upstage, 3 movable screens are covered with papers, notes, essays, bills, family wills, newspaper articles, book drafts, letters, diary pages, the real and remembered drafts of a writer's life. It is the evening of February 12, 1977, the night before Pauly returns to the Chapel of the Cross, where her grandmother Cornelia was baptized as a slave, and where Pauly will celebrate the first communion by a female African-American priest. Charles Kuralt and his on-the-road camera crew have been documenting her day. Pauly enters wearing slacks and a jacket, a red-orange kente cloth around her shoulders. With one arm, she cradles a thermos of coffee and carries a typewriter case. In the other, a Bible marked by faded purple ribbons, and is smoking a cigarette. Grandmother and grandfather stand before their protected image.
By and by, when the morning comes, when all the saints of God are gathered home, We will tell the story of how we've overcome, for we'll understand it better by and by.
By and by. When grandmother started singing that, watch out, she was on the warpath. I suppose after all these attempts to burn us out, it would be a shame if I were the one to actually accomplish it. Grandmother would roll over in her grave.
Roll over nothing. The good Lord gave me a mouth and I aim to use it.
Ghosts. They still terrify me, and with good reason. The dead speak. Ignore them at your peril. Grandmother always said,
Just 'cause someone's dead don't mean they're gone. See those pictures?
Family portraits appear on screens.
Remember where you come from.
Grandmother was very holy. Even grandfather said so, a holy terror.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in the center of that mantle stood a wooden cross, and above the cross, a painting of, oh no, not Jesus, of Miss Mary Ruffin Smith, grandmother's aunt and owner. I didn't understand exactly how Jesus and Miss Mary were related, but I knew that we worshiped them both, along with the University of North Carolina. When Miss Mary Ruffin Smith died, she bequeathed to the university what would have been my grandmother's inheritance. So grandmother considered herself one of the school's major benefactors. I shouldn't mention that. Where is my notebook? Oh gosh, I can't seem to function without something to write on, especially tonight.
Family members' portraits appear as she rearranges furniture.
Good evening, great-grandparents Sarah and Thomas. Good evening, grandfather Robert and grandmother Cornelia. Yes, and also hello, dead infant cousin Morton. 4 generations of ghosts hanging on the walls. The Fitzgeralds of Chester County, Pennsylvania, the Smiths of Orange County, North Carolina. Oh, that is my mother. I was 3 when she died. She collapsed on the stairs as my father was leaving for work. My only memory of the time is sitting on a trunk, banging my heels all alone. I have no memory of my father, well, alive, except for one brief visit to the asylum. I never saw him, but the violence of his death haunts me still. After my mother died, her sister, Pauline, came to Baltimore.
Little Pauline, would you like to come to Durham with me or go with your siblings to Aunt Rose's? Oh, little Pauline.
You?
Very well then.
Oh. I do burst into tears at the most inopportune moments. So, at the advanced age of 3, I sealed my destiny like a letter home. We 6 children were split apart, and I came here to live with my grandfather Robert, grandmother Cornelia, 2 maiden aunts, and what I came to think of as the gallery of departed stakeholders. What they all had a stake in was me. There are ghosts that weren't people, but stories, whispered events that blew through my childhood like dust.
Headline, August 15th, 1911, New York Times. Negro lynching in Chester County, Pennsylvania. Race riots feared.
Chester County, Pennsylvania, grandfather Robert's home place. A month after my baptism, Zach Walker got into a skirmish with a white cop and killed him. Walker was still chained to his hospital bed when a group of men dragged him to a field and in front of 5,000 men, women, and children burned him alive. And when he staggered from the flames, they shoved him back with their rakes. Now, when 5,000 neighbors We'll watch you burn and then head into town for a soda? Is this not America?
Howard Odom appears.
The mind of a Negro is like a child's.
I grew up in a time and a place of overhanging terror, a place haunted by the past.
He lives in the present and has no pride of ancestry.
And terrified of the future.
He cannot value, he has no value in his word.
Because I was the future.
Nor conceive of faith in humanity. Howard Odom, Columbia University.
And frankly, I scared the pants off of them.
End of scene.
I scared the pants off of them. I love it. Kathy, Jade, Kayla, all of you did such a wonderful job. Edith, thank you. We're going to see you back in just a little bit. What a lovely way to get us started. I am going to let you guys catch your breath, and I'm going to invite Dr. William Sturkey on with me so that I can introduce him, and then he's going to reflect a little bit on what we just saw. First, William, hello. Thank you so much for being here. You know, like Kathy Williams, you two are a rock star, so really happy to have you with us. And let me just tell everybody in the audience a little bit about you so they can just, like Kathy, understand just how truly of a rock star you are. So Dr. William Sturkey is an associate professor of history at UNC Chapel Hill, and he specializes in the history of race in the American South. He's an incredible teacher, writer, scholar. We'll make sure you get his full bio in the follow-up resources because he has some incredible pieces in the Atlantic, in the New York Times, all of them you must read. He was also featured on another of WUNC's great podcasts on Tested, Undoing a Harmful History. And that was about the renaming of Hamilton Hall after Pauly Murray. We'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. And Dr. Sturkey's awards and recognitions are just endless. So, you know, I know that you are beyond busy and in high demand. Your scholarship is so critical. And so I just want to note for everybody joining us how much I appreciate you, despite being so busy and your level of commitment. You always say yes when you know that K-12 teachers are going to be in the audience. And I think that just shows how much you really value K-12 teachers. I know it's a passion of yours. And so we thank you for that. And so at this point, now that we all know that you're a very big deal, I'd like you to just respond to what you just saw, what you heard, and maybe fill in a little bit more for us, some about Pauly's early life. What else should we know? What else should we know about her time in Durham? Several participants have actually asked what were her early influences? Who were her early influences, either good or bad? So talk to us first, if you will, just a little bit about the beginnings of Pauly Murray.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that very generous introduction. And I just want to really reiterate how much I really appreciate and respect the job that K through 12 teachers do. I still remember my K through 12 teachers so well. That's how I, really learned to fall in love with history. But so Pauly Murray, there's a lot to say about her early life. And I think, one of the most striking things is that she was an orphan at a very early age. So her mother was a nurse and had a brain aneurysm essentially, and passed away when she was 3 years old. Her father was thrown into an insane asylum basically after she was sent to live with her aunt in Durham, and her father was later beaten to death when Pauly was about 12 years old. And so she went back and saw him again at the funeral. And so, this traumatic upbringing sort of, torn away from your parents. But then, the environment that Pauly came into was this really special moment in Durham history where Jim Crow was the law of the land, absolutely. But Durham was an interesting place because there were a lot of Black professionals. There were African-American teachers, there were African-American business leaders who really crafted a world that allowed a person like Pauly Murray to really begin to grow and develop intellectually. And so, like in that interview that you played, the early parts of that, Pauly Murray talked about how important education was at her house. So her father had been a teacher. Her aunt, who she went to live with, was a teacher. And she once said that education was like a god in her household. So it was always important for her to be educated. And she lived just off of Moorhead, not far from the Durham Bulls Stadium, if anybody knows the area of Durham well. And of course, that was right in the middle of the Black business community. So North Carolina Mutual, the famous Black insurance company, was within walking distance of her childhood home. And she lived among a bunch of professionals, a lot of working class folks, absolutely. But the people that really influenced her were college graduates who were the teachers in her school. There were these people, a lot of them had gone to Wilberforce, that was mentioned in the early part of that recording. And, they talked about going to college. It was a normal thing for her to hear Black people talking about going to college, which was certainly not the case for Black people who grew up across the South at that particular point in time. And so Pauly Murray had this upbringing where she was surrounded by really talented professionals. Those were the role models in her community. And I also think it's interesting to say, too, that, her family, in terms of being an African-American family in Durham, let alone the entire Jim Crow South, they were doing pretty okay. They owned their own house. Their house was worth about $6,000 in 1930. And that's not a huge sum of money, even if we adjust for inflation, it's a little less than $100,000. But it's still, to own your own home, to not be a renter, that was one of the more valuable homes in the neighborhood. So, for that type of environment, even behind the veil of Jim Crow, they were doing fairly okay for African Americans in the South.
Yeah, in that same interview, and I've posted the link in the chat, it's like 5 hours, but it is just phenomenal. I encourage everybody with us tonight, pop in your earbuds, get on the treadmill and just listen, because it's just phenomenal. But she says at one point that she was actually a typist for North Carolina Mutual during 2 summers while in high school. And I just thought that was such a great connection. The idea of her down working on Black Wall Street during her summers was just such a cool idea to me. Will you talk to us a little bit too? So she graduates Hillside High School in Durham, North Carolina, top of her class, as you heard in that excerpt, like she was an overachiever, right? And she says, no more segregation for me, but she goes to Hunter College. She graduates from Hunter in 1933. What's significant about those years? What starts to take place at Hunter and in the 30s, would you say? What do we need to know?
So I think, Pauly Murray didn't want to go to Wilberforce because she didn't want to go to a Black school at that particular point in time. She'd be going to Black schools, segregated schools her whole life. So even though Wilberforce is in the North, it's near Dayton, Ohio, that didn't appeal to her because it was sort of replicating the racial segregation that she grew up with. And, I think maybe the unspoken thing too is there's certainly something about New York that was very appealing to her that she doesn't quite capture in any of the interviews. And Pauly Murray wanted to go to Columbia, she said, but she couldn't go to Columbia because they didn't let, and this is something that happens her whole life. She couldn't go to Columbia because they didn't let women into Columbia at that time, okay? So there's all these racial restrictions that are very, very plain and open, and then there's these gender restrictions that are very, very plain and open. And then, of course, there's the marriage of the two. So anyway, she couldn't go to Columbia. She couldn't go to Barnard because she couldn't afford the tuition there. She probably couldn't have afforded it at Columbia either. But then she went to Hunter College. And one of the disadvantages actually that she faced there was that she didn't have all the prerequisites that she needed to start at Hunter College. And that's because the Durham public schools weren't K through 12 at the time, they were K through 11. So she basically had to go and get all these additional credits and do another year of high school. Having accomplished that, went to Hunter, graduated, and joins this sort of community of artists and thinkers really at the back end of the Harlem Renaissance. So of course, the 1920s, New York, it's this Black intellectual movement that we still talk about and teach today. It's just absolutely amazing environment. And that's where Pauly Murray ends up right at sort of the back end of the Harlem Renaissance, takes jobs working with the WPA at the start of the New Deal, and is really exposed to a lot of new ideas, including far left labor organizing.
And, you know, around the same time, Kristen is asking if we could talk a little bit more about Pauli's gender identity, because it's during this time in the 1930s that she actually changes her name from Anna Pauline to Pauly, correct? So could you speak a little bit about her views on gender and how gender kind of becomes central at this point for her?
Yeah. So Paulie, you know, obviously didn't have all the language and the social acceptance that we do in society of people with alternative or, you know, different gender identities. So you just have to imagine a world where that's gone. And there's, or not gone, but never, you know, didn't exist yet. And so, you know, it's one of these Western gender constructions of male, female, which are not the case in all parts of the world, haven't always been the case in North America. But in any event, Paulie was always thinking about this as far back as we could tell. And without having the language of our modern society, you know, there were a lot of things about like dress, for example. So, you know, like the clothes that Paulie wore, the way that Paulie cut and styled her hair. And so, you know, there are the sort of surface level things, but then all the stuff that Paulie kept, there are these little writings or these little snippets here and there, and so much of her writings that ask questions about, you know, like, do I fit into this gender? You know, there are these stories about like asking a physician to, you know, check and see if there's any male genitalia or any remnants of that at all. But this constant sort of tension about, you know, am I really female? You know, and so that was something that it's really interesting, and it's hard to parse out without sort of the modern language that we have today. But these are clearly at the forefront of a young Pauly Murray's mind, thinking about, you know, where do I fit into this society, because I don't feel that I identify as a woman.
Right, right. I mean, I really feel like Pauly Murray just like came up against every barrier and just worked on beating down every barrier. That's why I say, like, I just can't think of anybody more incredible than Pauly Murray. It's really amazing. And so I want to actually go back to that concept of no more segregation for me, you know, because she really spends her life pushing up against that and trying to kind of overcome it. And so what I'm going to let you camera off and rest here for just a second, William, because I want to take us to 1938. You mentioned Pauly kept kind of backing up against whether it was gender restrictions or race restrictions. But in 1938, Pauly Murray applied to UNC Chapel Hill's graduate school in sociology. So I want you all to listen to this. It's just under 5 minutes, an excerpt that Paul is going to play for us about this time in Pauly's life. And then afterwards, we're going to have Kathy and her team come back on for another great reading from To Buy the Sun by Lyndon Harris. But for now, let's listen to Pauly talking about her 1938 application to UNC Chapel Hill. It's just about 5 minutes. I think you'll really enjoy it.
I suppose my ideas would tend to be more radical than those of the community that I left. So much so that in 1938, when I applied to the University of North Carolina, this was met with consternation by my family, by my immediate family, primarily because they were afraid they would be lynched or that the house would burn down. I think it was real fear, not disagreement with me on principle.
In law school.
But
so in November of 1938, you apply for a catalog and for an application. And thereafter, what occurs?
They send me an application blank, and they have written in to the printed application blank race and religion. This has been typed in. you know, so that it stands out apart from a normal form. I think I answered it, but may have said, but what difference does it make? Obviously, tongue in cheek. And in due course, I got back a letter from Dr. Frank P. Graham, who was the then president of the University of North Carolina, saying that I'm sorry, but the Constitution and the laws of the state of North Carolina prohibit me from admitting one of your race to the law school. And either the day after or 2 days after I received this letter, down came the Supreme Court decision in the Lloyd Gaines case. Now, the Lloyd Gaines case, decided in December 1938, held it was the beginning of the long road back from Plessy versus Ferguson, you know, the separate but equal decision. I immediately wrote back to the University of North Carolina and said, but here is the Lloyd Gaines case. And the story is that the legend is that Dr. Frank Graham sent my application down to the legislature, and presumably it was the bouncing of the application down to the legislature, the problems this raised for the legislature. Look, you know, we can't fool around with this. You know, the issue is upon us, that made it newsworthy. And it suddenly burst out over the radio, you know, and it became sort of national news. But it was this unidentified negress. It's in the headline. Unidentified negress makes application to the University of North Carolina. This correspondence went back and forth for a while, and then I put the whole stuff together in, you know, like an envelope, and sent it down to the NAACP, namely to Thurgood Marshall. Maybe I sent it to Walter White, and he referred it to, for them to take the case. I then got the shock of my life. I learned that the NAACP very carefully picks its cases in these days. Now, they had to win every case. Goes carefully into the background of the person who's going to be the bearer of the case. And all of this being said to a proud Fitzgerald Murray. You know, what does he mean by going carefully into the background of it? They have to be Simon pure, and you're not quite Simon pure enough. I was too maverick.
Now,
Excerpt 2. Pauly applies for entry to UNC. Headline, November 1938. Unidentified colored girl makes application to University of North Carolina Department of Sociology.
Unidentified colored girl, my foot! Anna Pauline, I just know that's you. Do you realize how difficult this could make things for us?
Now, Mother, you and Aunt Sally have been wanting me to move home, and...
Yes, but we didn't expect you to bring headlines. I simply must hold on to my job. I'm 68 years old, and there is no retirement plan for colored teachers.
Yeah, but UNC has a first-rate sociology department with Howard Odom. If I'm moving back to town, why wouldn't I apply? That makes no sense.
Paulie, this is North Carolina. Things don't have to make sense.
President Roosevelt appears.
Well, as president of this great country, I am proud to accept this honorary doctorate from the University of North Carolina with its tradition, American tradition of liberal learning and of acting in terms of tomorrow and not yesterday.
Sound of furious typing.
Dear President Roosevelt, American liberal learning, then why are 12 million Negro Americans as much political refugees as any Jews in Germany? And why does the United States government still refuse to pass anti-lynching laws? And why were there no Negroes at yesterday's ceremony?
There was a gospel choir.
Oh.
What? Singing in the choir is important.
Now that you are a Carolina alumni, will you lobby for Negro students to participate in this great liberal tradition, or are your words meaningless?
Sound of letter ripped from typewriter.
Confrontation by typewriter.
Headline, December 31st, 1938, Pittsburgh Courier. Victory greatest ever won for equality in schools. High Court says states must give equal facilities to colored citizens or else must admit them to existing institutions.
Crackerjack. So, what does the dean at UNC have to say about that?
Dean Pearson appears.
Under the laws of the state of North Carolina, members of your race are not admitted to this university.
What about the Supreme Court decision?
That is for the legislature to decide. In the meantime, please send your undergraduate transcript and residency documents. Very cordially yours.
Done. Plus, a copy to Mr. Walter White, NAACP, introducing Pauly Murray, your first test case.
Headline, Colored tries to enter Carolina U. Negro applicant confronts administration with liberalism issue. Negress applies to Carolina.
Negress? Really? Apparently, the legislature has decided to deal with the issue, meaning me, by adjourning for 2 years. Well, I shall not. Enter Thurgood Marshall. Mr. Marshall, there can be no doubt of my qualifications. I graduated at the top of my class at Hunter. My family has been in North Carolina for more than...
Paulie, it's nice to meet you. Your brother Will was my classmate at Howard Law. Brilliant student. Now, please call me Thurgood.
Oh, thank you. And Willie's been out of the hospital and hoping to re-enter Howard if they'll let him.
Oh, please tell him. Please tell the dean that we spoke. It would be great to have Will back, but clearly he comes from a family of fighters. That being said, the NAACP picks its cases and its plaintiffs very carefully.
Well, I would expect to be an excellent candidate.
I realize that, but, well, quite frankly, you come with baggage.
Well, of course I do. I've been living in New York.
Exactly. Harlem, no doubt, which raises many questions, one of which is residency. Additionally, the NAACP delves carefully into a plaintiff's past associations. The ideal female is shy and non-assertive, calm, with a feminine first name.
But my home is here. I'm heir to my grandmother's farm, and the only reason that my inheritance isn't larger is that it went to fund the very university that won't admit me. And who's saying that I am not calm? The university accepts white non-residents. So I believe that the 14th Amendment requires they accept me. Equal protection.
Paulie, I appreciate your strategy, but you are not a lawyer.
Apparently, it's easier for some people to fight for principles than to live them. Well, fine. I'll show up on campus and I'll be my own test case.
End of scene.
Thank you guys. I want you to keep going. You guys are so amazing. So William, come back on and let's talk about this period for just a little bit. If you want to reflect on any of that, Beverly says, not a lawyer yet. We see that seed starting to get planted. But talk to us a little bit about this time. And I think it's such a compelling aspect to consider the fact that Pauly pointed out, she had a family claim to UNC Chapel Hill. How so?
Okay, let's start with that. The legal history is pretty interesting too. So the family claim is that Pauly Murray was the great granddaughter of one of UNC's trustees. Now, you know, legacy family admissions has always been a part of UNC's history. It's still considered to this day. And so, you know, like it is at almost any university in the country. And so that she had such an early member of the Board of Trustees in her family was profound. I mean, that's almost like a guaranteed admission. But the thing is that she was Black. So what happened was that her great-grandmother was raped by both sons of this man who was a trustee, this physician, Smith. Smith Level Road in Carrboro and Chapel Hill is named after that family, but they were a wealthy family, and Pauly Murray's great-grandmother was owned by that family. And so she was raped by both of the brothers. We don't actually know who the father is, but one of the two. And so that child then was Pauly Murray's grandmother. And so she knew this story. And so that was a big part of the reason why she said, you know, look, this is my family's part of this university. As was pointed out earlier, you know, her grandmother was baptized on campus at the Chapel of the Cross. So her family had a long history. Her family members used to attend services essentially on campus. So there was quite a claim there.
Wow. And you started to get into the legal aspects of this as well. But back in that excerpt, you heard Pauly say, and I got the shock of my life, where, so talk a little bit about that and why the NAACP would not step in. We see Pauly's exacerbation, so perfectly read by Kathy. Why would the NAACP not step in here, especially given the precedent that had just come through?
Okay, so I'm going to try and do this briefly. So the goal was Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy versus Ferguson is decided in 1896, of course, and it's this guy gets arrested on a train car. He's only 1/8 Black, and the Louisiana racial segregation law that says that Black and white people have to ride on different trains is upheld within the confines of the 14th Amendment. So the 14th Amendment, passed during Reconstruction, says that Black people get equal protection under the law, that states cannot make them inferior citizens, basically. And so Plessy versus Ferguson is this test case because Black and white people have to ride on separate cars. This decision says that separate is fine as long as it's equal, so that railroad segregation laws like the one in Louisiana don't actually violate the Constitution so long as they're equal. Now, it was a really perverse reading of that law. Clearly, that's going to lead to inequality, but whatever, it spreads throughout American life for decades and decades and decades. So that was always the goal. And so the NAACP is fighting to basically repeal Plessy versus Ferguson, which they do. Brown versus Board of Education, everybody thinks it's about schools. It is. But really what it did was it repealed Plessy versus Ferguson. But at this moment in 1938, when Pauly Murray is applying to UNC, we don't have Brown yet. We just have the start of the education cases that are going to lead up to Brown. And the first one that's passed is out of Missouri. This guy Gaines out of Missouri, he went to Lincoln University in Missouri, a Black public school, and then he wanted to go to law school. But Missouri didn't have a law school for Black people. So he was a great test case because he would have to go somewhere else for law school. The state did not provide, which meant that Black people did not have equal rights in the state very clearly. So the NAACP won that case right at the moment when Pauly Murray was also applying to go to a graduate school. And one of the things that's very, very obvious is that none of the people in the NAACP education cases 1938, 1950, 1948. There's all these cases leading up to Brown. None of the test cases were women, first of all. So that's very obvious. You can see that that's something they didn't use women at this particular point in time for these cases. You know, a large part of it has to do with the fact that, you know, women didn't go out and they couldn't go out and get a lot of these jobs in the first place. There weren't the same sort of job prospects. So there's a lot of misogyny there based on the nature of American life at the time too. But then Pauly Murray, there's this residency issue that was mentioned. You know, North Carolina had a pretty strong argument, frankly, that Pauly Murray wasn't actually a resident of the state. And they could have altered some type of language to say, well, you know, you're from New York and therefore, you know, you're not somebody that we have in mind, even though there were clearly other people from out of state. But really, I think perhaps the biggest besides Pauly Murray's gender, I don't know what they knew about her gender identity and sexuality, but Pauly Murray had also been affiliated with far left labor groups, including a branch of the Communist Party in New York City. And so for any of those different reasons, the NAACP decided not to, you know, take Pauly Murray up on this, based on what she was pushing for them to do, and that's to be a test case.
She's too maverick. So can you speak a little bit, now that we're talking about, you know, she was eventually, I love the fact that she's offered an honorary degree, and at first she's really excited, and then she thinks about it and says, no, thank you. But also more recently, the renaming of your home away from home, the history department's Hamilton Hall, to Pauly Murray Hall. Will you speak a little bit about who was Hamilton? Why are we renaming it? Where is that process in terms of it becoming Pauly Murray Hall at UNC?
So history, poli-sci, and sociology are all in the social sciences at UNC. So Pauly Murray applied to the social sciences graduate program. And so in large part to honor Pauly Murray, the social sciences departments have decided to informally rename the building Pauly Murray Hall. They changed it from Hamilton Hall because Hamilton was a white nationalist, white supremacist who was not a member of the Klan or anything like that. He wasn't violent like many of the building names on campus, but he was a person that built a collection to promote white supremacy. So, you know, he went out and he gathered literally millions of documents all across the South, but he gathered documents in a way that would promote, you know, white plantation owners, white slave owners, their cause and their perspective. And we even have one example where they quite openly in the 1930s said that they were happy to get this new cache of documents because it was going to make slavery look better. And so, yeah. And so we decided that, you know, basically his intellectual legacy has not stood the test of time, but Pauly Murray's has. And so, you know, there's a whole process that it has to go through. They're probably never actually going to let us formally name it Pauly Murray Hall, which is what it should be called. But that's an exercise in semantics and power. But that's what we call it now informally, our three departments.
It's a perfect name. So I want to move forward a little bit. After being denied access to UNC Chapel Hill, Murray in 1941 enrolls in the HBCU Howard University. But it's this time that her feminism is sparked when Pauly starts to really come to terms, not with the fact that there's a Jim Crow to battle, but also what she coined Jane Crow. So I'm gonna, again, William, just hang out here with me for a minute. I'm gonna ask Paul to play just a quick 2-minute excerpt from Pauly Murray talking about the sexism that she encountered at Howard, which is where she ended up. So Paul, if you'll cue that up for us, it's just a quick 2 minutes.
I had not grown up in a family where limitations were placed upon women. My whole family tradition had been self-sufficient women. My grandfather, patriarch though he was, believed in his daughters being self-sufficient and independent. And so it just simply was not a part of my family tradition to expect any limitations upon what a woman could do or what she couldn't do. And I'd never thought of myself in terms of a woman. I thought of myself in preparing to be a civil rights lawyer, you know, for this cause. And I had not been in school, I guess, in 2 or 3 days. Professor Robert Ming, the late Robert Ming, said kind of, I can't tell whether he was kidding or whether he was being sarcastic or what, but he said, "Oh, we don't know why women come to law school anyway, but since you're here, you know, now, however you take it, one has to respond. I mean, you can't just say that this is really kidding." And then the second thing was that there was a notice on the bulletin board very shortly, maybe 2 or 3 weeks after school began, which said all male members of the first year class are invited to Dean so-and-so's for a smoker. There were only 2 females in the entire school, one of which was myself. And I was so stunned. You know, I couldn't imagine, what is all this? And so I raised the question. I was told this is that we want to look over the members of the first year class for the legal fraternity. Well, if it's a legal fraternity, why am I not eligible? Oh, well, why don't you women go and form a legal sorority? And so what I'm really saying is that removing the racial factor, Howard University being a school where the racial factor was not the problem, immediately the sex factor was isolated. And so this is the beginning of my conscious feminism. It began at Howard University back in the 1940s.
So William, we've got our thespians waiting in the wings here. They're gonna move into a little bit of Pauli's time at Howard, but William, I'd like to hear from you just briefly some of what you think is most impactful for her of her time at Howard. What do we need to know about this point in her life?
Howard is the center point of Black legal activism and scholarship in the world at this point. Howard's the place where they train the lawyers that take down Jim Crow. And so like the people that had been coming through Howard, most notably Thurgood Marshall, you know, but there's all these other attorneys that come through Howard too, are people that fundamentally changed America. So to be at Howard at that moment, you know, obviously there's an incredible amount of frustration because of the sexism. There weren't many Black female attorneys. There weren't many Black female professionals of any sort except for teachers. And so, you know, Pauly Murray has to deal with this. They're trying to take down Jim Crow and she has to deal with this BS about not being invited to the smoker. Like it must have just been so incredibly frustrating. But she did finish, despite this, Pauly Murray finished first in her class, despite having, you know, these obvious disadvantages. But Howard in DC was a really intellectually vibrant time, you know. This whole group of people, the most gifted Black legal minds in the country, were getting together and were thinking about how to take down Jim Crow, but then they were also fighting, you know, anti-lynching cases and investigating murders and different things like that. So it must have just been an incredible environment to be a part of, although, you know, I keep saying, except for this issue that she's, you know, barred from some of the smokers and parties and events.
Right. And it's incredible too. It's around this time she becomes a member of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, I think, and also helps form CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. So, I mean, again, just everything she does, I feel like she was part of everything, and really kind of exemplifies this idea that the civil right, it's a very long civil rights movement in so many ways. So I'm going to let you again take a little break, because we have Kathy and her team again with another excerpt about this time of Pauli's life, again with To Buy the Sun, the Challenge of Pauly Murray, written by Lyndon Harris. So Kathy and team.
Excerpt 3. After being rejected from UNC, working for the Workers' Defense League, and raising funds to fight the death penalty case against Odell Waller, we find Pauly in law school at Howard University.
Put it all down in a time capsule, bury it deep in the soil of poll taxers, sharecroppers, and presidents. In coffin and outhouse, all men are equal, and the same red earth is fed by the white bones of Thomas Jefferson and the white bones of Nat Turner. August 1942. Full moon rising, a dark red. I'm restless and lonely, waiting for the next wind.
Aunt Pauline at the home place and Pauly at Washington, D.C.
Sally? It's a letter from Pauly. Dear Mother, I broke with that situation in person. Oh, Mac. And then a young sophomore sort of walked into my life and, oh dear.
A doctor here threatened to send me for mental observation. And considering our family history, there's no telling how long I might have been put away.
But Dean Ransom will not allow it because he insists I have legal genius and wants me to graduate from Howard. Oh, I do like that man.
Oh, Mother, you and Aunt Sally have been so understanding, but the world is not. And because no laws protect me, I'm utterly exposed.
Howard Law School.
Welcome to our senior year. Time to elect the top man as Chief Justice of Howard Law School. Except there's a problem. The top man is a girl, so maybe we'll just adjourn for the year.
Ooh, they have just insulted my sense of justice and my vanity. Now that's a dangerous combination.
Oh, they've posted the grades. Everyone is 70 below or below on Spotswood Robinson's exam. Well, not everyone. Murray got a 95. Congratulations, Chief Justice Murray.
Well, look who got religion.
We always knew you had it in you. You think like a man.
Oh. On to Dr. Ransom's Civil Rights Seminar, where we compete with professors to present arguments for the overthrow of Jim Crow.
Dr. Leon Ransom appears.
Separate but equal. Plessy v. Ferguson. Have at it.
Okay, look. The whole strategy so far has been to show again and again how this facility and that facility aren't equal. Why not stop nibbling at Plessy like a bunch of mice and attack it head on?
What is the precedent?
It should be overruled.
Why? What is the precedent?
Well, it's wrong. See, now the 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection, but segregation is built on one group being inferior. So how is that equal? Freedom is not separate. Freedom is not segregated. Freedom is indivisible.
Murray, think like a lawyer, not an English major. The world doesn't need another poet.
Well, lawyers may represent facts, but poets respect truth. And I bet you Plessy will be overturned within 25 years.
You want to put your money where your mouth is?
Mm-hmm. $25, $1 a year, Professor Ransom.
I'll see you in 1969 to collect.
Oh, opposition to my ideas always arouses a latent mule-headedness in me.
Latent?
So, Dr. Ransom, for my final thesis, I propose to write, should Plessy be overruled?
So, you're going to take on this enormously complex constitutional problem that has beaten scores of legal scholars?
Yes, I am.
Well, watch me step out of the way. I'll even extend your deadline. I want to see what in the world you come up with.
End of scene.
All right, William, let's talk a little bit about what we saw there. We see here a little bit more about Plessy versus Ferguson, and Pauly Murray really ends up having such major legal impacts. We know that, eventually Thurgood Marshall is referring back to her ideas, even later Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Can you talk a little bit to the impact Pauly made in this field of law?
Yeah. So I have to say first too that Ransom went to Wilberforce, and then he went to Ohio State. But so there's another Wilberforce connection. Anyway, but so Pauly Murray, the single greatest contribution Pauly Murray made to taking down Plessy versus Ferguson was her book that she compiled for the Methodist Church that was about states' laws on race and color. And so Pauly Murray and a couple of research assistants put together this enormous volume of all the different race laws in the United States, not just in the places that had Jim Crow, not just the South, but in every single state in the country. So like there's laws from Minnesota in there. And one of the things that Pauly Murray wanted to show with such a comprehensive volume was how inconvenient and unconstitutional all of these laws were. Again, not just in the South, but in all states across the United States. And so it was sort of that book itself, which came out in 1950, was sort of a handbook for any Black attorney who wanted to take on any of these different laws. And when you look at them together, you see how much these laws about race and place really dominate and order our society in ways that are clearly incompatible with the 14th Amendment. So like some of the early reviews that came out were just, like everybody needs to have this, all the attorneys need to have this. If you have this, then that's a great way to start beginning them to make the argument against Plessy versus Ferguson.
Yes. So, and the other thing that just kills me is once again, she graduates top of her class at Howard. She receives the Rosenwald Fellowship, which tradition shows that as the valedictorian, previous top graduates get this fellowship and they usually go to Harvard University. But Pauly Murray is rejected by Harvard University because they don't accept women at this time. So what does Pauly Murray do next? I mean, I'm sure she got dejected and just gave up and did nothing, right? Because that's who Pauly Murray, not at all. What happens next?
Yeah, I mean, it's really just insane, all the different layers of discrimination that you face. But yeah, Harvard will take you if you're Black, but not if you're a woman, for this fellowship. So Pauly Murray went and studied at Berkeley, basically got a master's of law degree at Berkeley. And one of the reasons that Pauly Murray chose Berkeley was because there were so many attorneys involved with World War II. People don't really think about that, but especially like Japanese internment. My colleague in the law school, Eric Muller, works on that. But in any event, the faculty at Berkeley had largely stayed intact. And Pauly Murray decided that she wanted to go and work with them. Obviously wasn't going to go work anywhere in the South. And so, yeah, headed out to California.
Yeah, and then she goes on to be the first Black deputy attorney general in California in 1946. She gets named Woman of the Year by the National Council of Negro Women and by Mademoiselle magazine in 1947. I mean, it's like there's nothing she didn't do. It's really just incredible. But I'm looking at our time here, and I want to make sure we get to one more excerpt by our wonderful performers, and then I'll bring you back and we'll have kind of a closing discussion. So many great questions coming in. Audience, keep pitching those. So William, I'll let you camera off, and then I will turn it over for one last reading by Kathy and her wonderful team of To Buy the Sun, The Challenge of Pauly Murray, written by Lyndon Harris.
Excerpt 4. After working in law and losing her beloved companion Rennie, Pauly decides to go to seminary.
I have waited 3 years for this general convention, but I just haven't the strength for another rejection. Perhaps I shall just stay here and bide my time. Oh, now that is a first.
Phone rings.
May I speak to Dr. Murray?
Speaking.
This is the Reverend Peter Lee. I've waited years for this moment. The resolution stating that no man shall be denied access on the ground of sex just passed. Are you there?
I most certainly am.
We would be honored to have you celebrate your first communion here at the Chapel of the Cross, where your grandmother Cornelia was christened as a slave.
Headline, January 9th, 1977, Clarion Ledger. Episcopal Church ordains first Black female priest. National Cathedral, Washington.
On a dark, icy day, God's frozen people packed the National Cathedral for the first regular and approved ordination of women.
Imagine Pauly being part of something regular and approved.
At the moment of my ordination, a ray of sunlight illuminated the stained glass window, and the church erupted into a joyful chaos, and a little girl went skipping down the aisle. I caught her eye, and I winked. She counts. And in a life, what counts? Walking here to the old home place under this cold, star-filled sky, a strident joy waked in me. And it's true, it is true that some things can't be bought, but some things can. Now, Miss Mary knew that the only way to make sure my grandmother and her sisters wouldn't be sold as slaves was to buy them herself. So she worked in her garden by moonlight to earn the fee. And when she had, Miss Mary told them they were free. Our charge is not to let sleeping bones lie, nor lock the door on skeletons of our shared history. Our charge is to breathe life into what is broken and resurrect a new being. So in a life, what counts? With open eyes and open heart, we are often called to choose truth and risk over comfort and ease. And now is such a time as this. Each of us is called to carry on the great work of liberation, and each of us is called to inspire the next. In almost every case, I failed in my attempts, but I did not fail to make the attempt. And now I've lived long enough to see my lost causes found. And what counts? Every question, every honest question counts. Every searching response, every compassionate act or expression of kindness and welcome and mercy count. Every reconciliation and every act of forgiveness, and every time we refuse to be limited by what is, and we choose to reach for what may be, it counts. For we have no other land, no other dream but this.
Light fades on Pauly and up on an image of Pauly Murray mural on brick walls of Durham. Blackout.
Oh, Kathy Williams, you just gave me such chills. Again, Pauly Murray speaks directly to us today. Thank you guys. And also Edith Snow, Jade Arnold, Kayla Brown, thank you guys so much for being here and doing this reading for us. You were all phenomenal. We appreciate you. So I know everybody in the audience is giving you snaps and claps. So thank you guys. We appreciate you. And Kathy, I know you're going to stay with us. Just so you guys know, the chat box is blowing up. So players, make sure you check that out before you exit out. But Kathy, it's so great to have you. And William, you can go ahead and come back on too. And while he's joining us, Kathy, I just want to hear from you because you were so involved in this play since 2011, you directed it. Why did you sign on to do this? And what does this work mean to you? Which is another way of asking, what does Pauly Murray mean to you?
Well, you know, I will share with you, I have a little bit of a personal connection to this. My colleague and partner, Lyndon Harris, and I, we've developed many pieces with Hidden Voices. And when we were approached with this idea, I said to her, I was like, Pauly Murray is like, oh, you know, my mother gave me a book about her, like when I was, you know, in my early 20s. And I'm like, you know, great project, let me go look at it. I go to open the book and there the inscriptions from my mother says, be sure to read this, which I hadn't at that time. Be sure to read this. Your grandfather was Pauly's law professor. So my grandfather was Leon Ransom. And my Pauly Murray was very close to my grandparents and used to babysit for my mother at some points when she was growing up. So once I realized that, and then I didn't know anything about her. And then I learned about her life. And I think I feel like most of your panelists, which was, why have I never heard of her? Because it seems like everything, all roads lead to Pauly Murray. And she is such an amazing, she's my shero. She's just one of my sheroes now. I'm an Episcopalian, so she kind of hits every box for me. And I'm just so inspired by her, and she has so much to teach us today.
So true. All roads lead to Pauly Murray. That's exactly right. So in that excerpt, that last passage, I mean, it is speaking to the times we are in today when Pauly, you as Pauly said, our charge is not to let sleeping bones lie, nor lock the door of skeletons on our shared history. Our charge is to breathe life into what is broken and resurrect a new beginning with open eyes and open heart. We are often called to choose truth and risk over comfort at ease. Now is such a time as this. That just knocked me over because, you know, again, we have a lot of K-12 teachers with us tonight. Teachers, I want you to hear those words again, truth over comfort, because these have been big words in our state politics and I mean, politics around the nation for that matter. And Pauly Murray, again, is really prophetic here because here we are in a state with the Republican-backed House Bill 324 to limit, and I think, frankly, scare teachers from teaching a comprehensive history. We have our Lieutenant Governor with the Facts Task Commission, which is basically modern day McCarthyism. So, you know, where, you know, for those of you that don't know, it's a place where parents can report their children's teachers for indoctrination in the classroom, because that's happening, right? I mean, we all know if a teacher could indoctrinate a kid, it would be do your homework, right? Stop talking in my class. But, you know, it feels in some ways like we are firmly back in the days of McCarthyism. And I know that you, Kathy, are a teacher. I know that, you know, obviously you, William, are a teacher. So I'm really just interested to hear what you think of this, how Pauly's words are so relevant to us today. And today, WWPD, what would Pauly do, right? Like, what would she have to say about this? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I'll go first, and then, you know, every time I listen to William, I'm always inspired to just go and learn more and spend more time in books and in history and really learn. I think one of my questions is when all this began, I sort of was like, well, what do you think teachers have been teaching? I mean, this sudden, like, you cannot teach about race, and you cannot, I'm like, good teachers have been teaching history and truthfully forever. I do feel that for our K-12 teachers, I do, and all of us, I am angry about the sort of McCarthyism of it, though, and the attempt to intimidate them, and also what a disservice they're doing to our young people who, they've got the internet, they've got the world at their fingertips.
That's right.
So I don't know how or why they think this is going to work, but young people are, as we know, our youth are leading the way. I mean, Pauly was a very young woman.
That's right.
As she began her career, and the truth will find a way. So, but it is discouraging and it's frightening, and I know it can be intimidating. And I want to shout out to all those K-12 teachers too.
Yes. And I read just coincidentally that in 1952, Pauly Murray was directly impacted by McCarthyism, that she lost a US State Department post at Cornell because her references, who were Eleanor Roosevelt and Thurgood Marshall and A. Philip Randolph, were considered too radical. And so the university elected not, in view of the troubled times in which we live, they did not have her come on board. So she herself was a victim of McCarthyism. William, your thoughts on just the place we are today in terms of teaching history? What are your thoughts in terms of what Pauly might teach us and just about the context in which we are living today?
Well, I think Pauly Murray very clearly valued the study of history, especially in her own family. And I would recommend Proud Shoes as, my favorite book about Pauly Murray, but it was so important to her sense of identity. And I think that's another way that Pauly Murray was really a forerunner to many of the conversations that we're still having. Because if you know that history, the way that you view your future and your rightful place fundamentally changes. And I think that, I don't teach in K through 12 classrooms. I've engaged with a lot of the public in various forms, and sometimes I do teach in K through 12 classrooms, but not like, teachers in the audience. But in any event, it's so different now than it was just like 6 years ago, honestly. And I know that we have so much left to do, and that, teaching will change over and over and over again. But like conversations about race and the history of race in this country and the public, to me, are completely different than they were like in 2015, when Dylan Roof sparked a whole nother sort of wave of these conversations. And, that is very heartening to me, even though I know that we have a long way to go. I think that we've made quite a bit of progress in the last 6 years.
I think that's a great point. And it definitely feels like we're in it right now, right? Like we're in the middle of the storm, and it's going to be interesting to see how we come out on the other side of this. And just a reminder to all the teachers, we've got a lot of resources, a lot of lesson plans. We're going to load you up in a follow-up email after all of this. I want to go back to that excerpt because, we see that Pauly enters the priesthood. She, in 1977, becomes the first African-American woman in the United States to become an Episcopal priest after the church changed its policy and allowed that. So how do you think Pauly ended up here? Why did she make this choice? Oscar specifically is asking, did she continue her activism through the pulpit, so to speak? So talk to us a little bit, and then she sainted in 2012, finally. How do you guys think she ended up in the priesthood, and how did she use that as a platform?
I know a little bit in our research for the play. It was the death of her longtime companion, Rennie, which I think was really instrumental in moving her towards wanting to focus on love and compassion towards the end of her life. How she, the particular path through the Episcopal Church, I'm not exactly sure about, and maybe William knows a little bit more about that. But I know that, she had a very long time relationship with this woman, and but they could never be publicly together. And the death of Rennie was pretty impactful on her in terms of wanting to find some way to be a part of her, the ritual of her death, and some of the other, she found her way out through the Episcopal Church.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's all right. And I think the other thing that I want to point out, I think a lot of people later in their lives the way that you see the world and your place in it changes so much. So during Pauly Murray's life, Jim Crow did end, before she went back to the church. And, we get the Civil Rights Act, which offers some protections for women, although that's obviously going to be contested in the future. But it's just almost like the way that she was thinking about things, some of the victories that needed to happen and the urgency of them weren't quite there. And of course, she was later in life. And I think she just had different goals and different things that she was thinking about the meaning of life and religion and her place and her family's place in that broader spectrum of American history.
That's right. We have a question. One of the things we haven't talked a lot is that Pauly Murray was a co-founder of Now. But Max is asking, Pauly Murray provides incredible insights into intersectional realities. Did Pauly Murray engage with the question of inclusion in Now? And my understanding is she actually left Now because she wasn't quite happy with the leadership. Can you guys speak to her work with Now? And did her gender identity or, issues of LGBTQ become an issue in that work? Why did she kind of break with Now?
I'd be happy to jump into that. So my colleague, Katie Turk, is writing a book about the history of Now. So I'll just put a plug in for that. It'll be out in a couple of years. But so, Now has got like all these white first and second wave feminists in it who have all these different political problems that many people are probably familiar with. There's the generational issues. First of all, she's of a different generation than a lot of people that are driving Now. There's the racial issue. Now wasn't always super welcoming to Black folks, and then also to working class people. There were a lot of sort of elite, super educated women in Now who were very much facing their own struggles, but they weren't really sympathetic all the time to new generations, and certainly not working class African Americans. So that Now's got all sorts of issues that I didn't even get into, sexuality. And so for a lot of those reasons, I think Pauly Murray just sort of decided to leave the organization. But Now it's this, drama-filled organization that had an enormous impact in American life, but it had all sorts of problems that came out from within.
So it kills me because we're at time, and there are a million things we have not talked about that Pauly Murray said and did and fought for. That is just what is so phenomenal about her. But I want to close with two things. I want to ask the two of you a closing question. And then if you're still with us, stick with us just 4 minutes late, because I'm going to close out with the final excerpt from Pauly Murray in Pauly's own words. And again, it doesn't get better than that. But Kathy and William, before I let you go, Diana has pitched a question that I just love. It's an opinion question. Diana is asking, if Pauly Murray were alive today, what would they be most proud of in terms of what's happening today? And what would they say we still need to do if Pauly were with us today? WWPD. What do you think?
Well, I think she would be amazed at the advances in the way we view gender. I think she would also be amazed that we've taken so many steps backwards. I think she would just, kind of be like, I think she would be really shocked at, the steps backwards that the country has taken. But I think as William said earlier, with her lifelong kind of struggle to understand, because she spent a lot of time in mental hospitals. I mean, she had a lot there. Her mental health was really impacted by her gender identity, and because she was poverty. She never had much money. She didn't eat well. She was tiny little human. But I think whenever I think about her nowadays, I think, wow, if she would just be like, I think happy to see how we've advanced in our ideas around gender. I think would be great.
Yeah. What do you think, William?
Yeah, I think that's right. Gay marriage, the language that we have, God knows we haven't solved everything. But language that we have for people like her, LGBTQ people, the way that they can navigate the world, I think should be very heartening by that. It's certainly not great, but it's so much far superior to her own time. I think the thing that would probably get her is what she'd be disappointed by is how many Black kids in this country still don't have an opportunity for a good education. And it would probably, she might turn down an honorary degree from UNC like next week if she, sort of saw the way that the broader country and region are having conversations about their own history versus how stalled we've been at UNC, but then also the sheer numbers of African American students, which don't come anywhere close to the demographics of the state.
That's right. Yeah. And, I just thank you guys for that. And I just wish we keep the chat kind of shut down during the event just for focus, but I wish all of you K-12 teachers could see the chat. It is just blowing up with everyone in here saying thank you to the K-12 teachers. There's also a really lovely comment from Candy Bill saying, I've been in education for 54 years. I started in 1968 in Durham County at Neal Junior High School when they integrated. I used to teach at Rogers Her, Candy, woohoo, Durham. But she says, I've attended many performances, lectures, workshops, none that are as outstanding as what have been shared tonight. Thank you to all. I shall be sharing Pauly Murray with my teacher ed students at NCSU and urge them to teach truth and justice and history that we should all know and understand. So that is a great way to close out tonight. So with that, I just want to say a huge thank you to just boundless thank you to the wonderful professor, artist, educator. You are everything, Kathy Hunter Williams. Thank you so much for your beautiful reading tonight. You're sensational. We appreciate you. Can we see you at Playmakers coming up? Do you have anything in the hopper happening?
Yeah, I think our first production is this fall. It'll be opening in November, Skin of Our Teeth by Thornton Wilder. And then I'm directing next, Stick Fly.
Yeah.
So come and
check
see us.
her out. She's always this fabulous. And thank you again to the performers who joined you tonight. Those young folks were just amazing and wonderful. Dr. William Sturkey, just professor extraordinaire, the busiest man I know at UNC Chapel Hill, but again, who always makes time for outreach to K-12 teachers. Thank you. We appreciate you. I want to say thank you again to our co-hosts and the sponsors of tonight's event, the Orange County Human Rights Coalition. Please check out and tell the folks you know in Orange County, North Carolina, especially youth, to apply for the Pauly Murray Award. Information will be coming out towards the end of this month. That youth category, teachers, community members, that's where our future lies. So let's get the next Pauly Murray queued up and acknowledged in that award. I also have to say thank you to my colleague, Paul Benici. He's in the chat. He's literally like the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, except he's a real nice guy. He's going to be following up with an email of lesson plans. He's going to let teachers know how you can get CEUs for tonight. And teachers, again, K-12 teachers, thank you. Thank you for every day you step foot into the classroom. I say this all the time, but it has been an unimaginable last year and a half, almost 2 years. And you have showed up and you've been present and you have continued on even as the rest of us crawled into fetal position on the floor. You are the glitter and the glue, and do not underestimate the power you have in the classroom to bring up the next generation of Pauly Murrays by elevating voices such as hers and by continuing to teach the truth. Teach the truth. And the last thank you tonight I have to issue is to the late Pauly Murray. All of us, every single one of us, whether we realize it or not, have been impacted by Pauly's incredible work, by the relentless drive and relentless pursuit of justice that Pauly Murray had. I hate that she passed away of cancer on July 1st, 1985, but so much of her legacy is prophetic and speaks to us today. It's all around us. And there is still so much to do, as we just talked about. And so tonight, I'm going to leave you with a hook that I hope encourages you to go and read some of Pauly Murray's incredible writings, which we didn't even have time to talk about really tonight. Paul is going to play us out with the final 3-minute excerpt from that wonderful 1976 interview, which you are all going to go listen to now, from our friends at the Southern Oral History Program, in which Pauly reads her poem, one of her poems from Dark Testament, and she also talks a little bit about it and issues a challenge right to each of us today in this time. So stick around, listen, be inspired. And again, just thank you so much for the honor of your time tonight. Good night.
We have no other dream, no land but this. With slow, deliberate hands, these years have set her image on our brows. We are her seed, have borne a fruit native and pure as unblemished cotton. Then let the dream linger on, and that's the dream of freedom. Let it be the test of nations. Let it be the quest of all our days, the fevered pounding of our blood, the measure of our souls, that none shall rest in any land, and none return to dreamless sleep. No heart be quieted, no tongue be stilled, until the final man may stand in any place and thrust his shoulders to the sky, friend and brother to every other man. I am saying that we must accept the challenge of our existence being that of a rejected, unwanted, persecuted minority. And that, in a sense, we cannot accept this. We must make our contribution to history. And remember, I'm writing this in 1943. But that the way in which we do this constant insistence, no word is mentioned of violence, no heart be quieted, no tongue be stilled. If I may be slightly profane against what I consider fairly profound expression of I would say, don't shoot them, worry them to death. And it's this notion of never letting this principle, never letting this dream die, always expressing it in our lives, in our being, the goal being that the final man, whoever the final man is, not necessarily blacks, whoever the underdog is, that person may stand up and feel a sense of dignity and relatedness to other people, until the final man may stand in any place and thrust his shoulders to the sky, friend and brother to every other man.